Footy. This is Phil here, and I have a very special guest. I think this is the biggest guest we've pulled, not including, I guess, a couple small side interviews, audio only, with Lutz Pfannenstiel. But we have Manuel Veth with us here today. Manuel, how's it going, man?
It's going all right. There's no way I'm your biggest guest.
Yeah, well, I
That
mean,
can't
we're a
be
small
true.
podcast.
For now, once City take off, it will be a massive podcast. You'll see.
I hope so. We'll see. I'm not counting on it, but that would be a lot of fun if you are correct. I would love that. But Manuel, if anyone hasn't heard of you or seen your work online, I think we all know you most for all the breaking news you've been putting on Twitter, especially about St. Louis City players recently. But you're also the area manager for Transfermarkt USA, correct? So you've been doing
That's
work with them
correct.
for a long time.
Really, a long time. It does feel like a long time because I started with them 2 months before the pandemic hit, and that's 2 decades, right? Rather than 2 years.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So yeah, I've worked with them now. They did when I started for them, really trying to hit and expand into the US market. Of course, Transfermarkt has been a big site for quite some time, and my job with them is to sort of do what they do in Germany and in some of the other countries, and transport it to the North American market, so the US and Canada, where I'm Canadian, I'm German Canadian, I'm based on Vancouver Island on Canada's west coast, and sort of do what they've done in other markets. And I have to say, it's done. Like, the reception has been fantastic. People in the different markets have really taken the product, and it's been a lot of fun, and we get to break a lot of transfers, which is fun, but we also get to do in-depth interviews and articles, and it's fun. It's fun, a lot of fun.
Yeah, so it's crazy. I've heard your interviews, many different podcasts. It's the Bundesliga one for Total Soccer Show is one of my favorites. I'm a big follower of Bundesliga, but I didn't realize that you lived in Vancouver, first of all, and then not
Vancouver
until today.
Island. I live on
this
Vancouver
is different.
Island.
Okay, explain the difference then.
The difference is that Vancouver is the city. Vancouver Island is where British Columbia's capital is on.
Oh, okay.
Victoria. So we're two different cities, but we're like, it's close. We're separated by a body of water, but it's only about 120 kilometers or 90 miles between the two places. So tomorrow, for example, I am at the Vancouver Whitecaps game.
Cool.
The season opener for the Whitecaps. It is a little different. Victoria is its own city. It's actually quite a big city as well. So that's where I'm based in. But of course, I am spending a lot of time in Vancouver because the British Columbia, that's the province where both of those cities are in. Slightly different, but almost the same.
No, I'm sure it's quite a bit different compared to Vancouver. Is such a I've never been there, but I do hope to make it to Vancouver Island, and that's something we almost did. I actually honeymooned in Seattle, and we were gonna take the
not
the ferry
a great
up.
city. Yeah,
no, I know. You have
Seattle,
to hate them, I think.
No, I have lots of friends in Seattle. One of my closest friends lives in Seattle. I spent a lot of times, like before the pandemic, of course, and when the border was much easier to cross. As you said, there is Victoria is kind of in between a ferry to one or a ferry to another.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a triangle of cities that are very, very close and very interconnected. So the pandemic has been brutal in that it has separated people for 2 years, right? And I think our respective governments don't quite understand how harsh it is to have things like testing and so on the border, because it does prohibit us from having having relationships that we have fostered for many, many years, right, and decades.
Yeah.
So, but it looks like we're kind of going out of that, so that's nice.
Prayers up for that one, right? But yeah, I always regretted not going to Vancouver or Victoria Island. I mean, so
Vancouver Island. So be careful, because there is a Victoria Island.
No, that's what I mean is Victoria Island. We could have gone there in my honeymoon. We didn't go.
No. So I'm on Vancouver Island.
Oh, Victoria, I know. Yeah.
Victoria Island is on the Arctic Circle, so I doubt you will have been going to go there.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna go look at a map, and I'm gonna get all this a little more figured out. I have a big blind side on the western side of the country, so something
No
I needed to
worries,
know.
man.
Well, something else you said you were gonna do today, I kind of was like curious. You said you're cycling right now. You're at like a bike shop when I got the time zones
Mm.
incorrect this morning, right?
Yeah, no, I used to play soccer, among many other sports, and I've totally wrecked my knee. And a few years ago, I started riding bike, and it's gotten into a passion. And I wanted to start racing back in 2020, but pandemic kind of put put a
Yeah.
bar on that. So I'm finally signed up for my first races this year. After 2 years of just training for nothing, finally get the race, which is nice because like I used to play competitive soccer. I was a varsity rower in university, on Vancouver Island, and it's nice to be able to go back to competitive sports
Yeah.
after 2 years of not being able to do any of that.
Extremely cool. Yeah, and we all need something to keep us occupied when we got nothing else to do.
Insane.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about soccer. I was really curious about all that stuff. But let's talk about all the announcements the news you've been
Mhm.
breaking lately. And we'll go in order of when they were signed and when they were announced. Selmir Pedro would be where we would start then. The first player, a pro player ever to be announced for the MLS team that will be starting in 2023. Left back for FK Sarajevo. He's a Bosnian national, and that's where I'll stop. What were some of the thoughts about him that you had when you first saw the news? Broke the news.
To be honest, so I didn't break that one. I think
Oh,
St.
okay.
Louis announced it before I got my fingers on it. A little bit of a left back signing, I think. Left back signing for a left back. Still near Pedro. Yeah, he arrives from FK Sarajevo. He's going to play for the MLS Next Pro or Pro Next Pro. Yeah, Next Pro. I always mix it up. Pro Next and Next Pro. Starting in July, right? They paid 300,000 for him, dollars or euros. Sorry, euros. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I know that the sporting side of it is quite high on him. He's a Bosnian national team player. I know there's a huge Bosnian community in St. Louis, so I know that. Or this sounds like a marketing signing. He's not. That wouldn't be fair, but I know that they really wanted to make the first signing someone who had that kind of background to sort of get that community excited, right? And he's a player. I think he's a good piece and a good starting block, and he's going to be one of many signings to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a theme for a lot of these players that we're getting from Europe, but there were lots of rumors of him being picked up by other players. I know Lazio was rumored to be interested in him, and so I didn't know if you had heard about some other teams that were interested in him, or whether it was relatively easy to get him for 300,000 euros.
Yeah, there was a lot of teams interested. I know there's a couple of Bundesliga teams that wanted him as well. So he was on a lot of people's radar. And then Lutz got it done, I guess, and signed the guy through his various connections that he has. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to see him too. I can only reiterate what people in Bosnia have told me, that that he's a very good player, and that they were a little surprised maybe that his next step was MLS. But I think MLS is changing, right? Like now, if you are in your early 20s and you go to MLS, that's not your final destination necessarily anymore, right? Like the league is changing dramatically, in that it becomes more of a league where players can go and then develop and then actually still have a pathway to go to one of the bigger European leagues.
Yeah, I think we're going to circle back to like 3 or 4 of the themes we just kind of brought up that are going to be recurring in this interview. So let's move on to the next player, and you guys will be sensing some of these things. Thomas Ostrak. You'll have to forgive my pronunciations today, Manuel. But he comes from FC. This is the one I've been working on because I've heard you make fun of Taylor on TSS for saying it the wrong way. FC Köln. I've tried. That's the best I got. Tell us a little bit about Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas Ostrak. That's a good signing, a really good signing, and when I broke that news that he was going to Louis, I had a couple people in German football phone me, and they're like, "No way, no way, he's going to St. Louis. No way." He's like Köln will never let him leave, and there's a couple other Bundesliga teams like, "No way." I'm like, I, my source is pretty good. I know where he's going. And then they're like, no, 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 no. And then a day later, it was announced.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, it's a
incredible.
good signing. I mean, Köln were really upset that they couldn't keep him. The issue, of course, is if they didn't give him the playing time that he wanted, right?
Yeah.
And I've been sort of hearing that from Ed Köln. I think he's played in 4 Bundesliga games. And Steffen Baumgart, the head coach at Köln, he's been kind of a little peeved about the fact that he's leaving. But at the same time, if he didn't play him enough, and he sort of preferred other players in that position. Duda is one, right? And Kainz is another one, and Thielmann. And you sort of, when you have a player that you need to develop, you sort of have to ask yourself the question, if you don't give them a good pathway for development, you might lose them. And I think that's exactly what happened here. And I know that here again, Arminia Bielefeld were a Bundesliga team that were looking at him. Stuttgart was another one. Those teams kind of lost out on this. And yeah, he's going to play. He's going to play MLS Next Pro. That name is very confusing, by the way. They should have thought of something way better. So he's going to play that as well. Yeah, I think this is a really exciting signing. And it speaks again for the people at the club to convince someone who has many options to come to St. Louis and say, you can play here 2-3 years, and then you're still in your mid-20s, and you can still go back to Germany. The pathway from MLS to the Bundesliga isn't quite open one. Or Italy. Italy is another one where a lot of players have been going lately, right? Or you go to Belgium, and so there's lots of options that you have if you are a young player and come to MLS and play here a couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's one, I think he mentioned how, he wants to stay in or get into his national team picture. And that's something I think we'll touch on with our final player we're going to talk about today as well. But a couple things that struck me about him. One is that his stats are not impressive, but all we're hearing about this guy is how impressive he is as a player and how much he's desired, and his ceiling is rather high from what everyone is saying. And so we'll be able to see that as well. But another thing you mentioned, the teams interested in him, maybe Stuttgart and Arminia Bielefeld. Recently, someone in the front office in St. Louis put up some stats about pressing stats and the style of play. And that was one thing I noticed, is that those two teams you just mentioned, by watching them and seeing them on that chart in the same kind of regions, it sounds like he's a good fit for a pressing team, which is the rumor for St. Louis, right?
That's exactly where it's going to go. They want to press. You see a lot of MLS teams kind of go and play with that number 10 role, that traditional number 10 role, right? And that was sort of the theme. A little bit less last year, but the year before, where you had a lot of teams kind of looking for that specific kind of almost traditional playmaker. And you're not necessarily going to see that in St. Louis. You're going to see that more, and that's why Bradley Cannell came as well, right? Because he is from that Red Bull school of thought, where you like counter press, attack. So you're going to see that. In St. Louis, it's going to be a little bit different than a lot of the other MLS teams are constructed. And the signings so far fit in, I think. So yeah.
There's a definite purpose, and these players all seem to represent that purpose, in my opinion. And maybe another, I don't know how you feel about this parallel, but perhaps he could look like someone like Brendan Aronson does for Salzburg and when he played for the Union, if things go well for us, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon kind of developed in a little bit of a different direction when he joined Salzburg, right?
Okay.
He was a bit more of a static player, just simply because like that was almost demanded.
Hmm.
And he has developed almost into more of an attacking. Instinct. We have this wonderful he's almost like a half player of two positions. Like still an attacking midfielder, but he's almost playing on a wing as well. And
Hmm.
you see that in the Salzburg system, or in the Red Bull traditional Red Bull system, because Leipzig have sort of kind of moved away from that a little bit.
Yeah.
But where you have like two attacking players playing about just behind two traditional forwards, and they're on the wing, but not really, because they kind of press and it turns into like a four attack kind of formation, and it's very flexible. And you see that with Brandon Aronson's play quite a bit. That the system that he's in now has almost made him more of an attacking half 10, half winger, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah. And so could you see Ostrak doing something like that, or
With Ostrak,
Ostrak? Thank you.
um, yeah, I think so. I mean, it'd be interesting. I mean, this is just one of many pieces. Like, how many players have they signed? Oh, four. And let me just take a look at the MLS Next Pro team, because that list has just come out too, right?
Hmm.
And some of these players on the MLS Next Pro team will probably make the roster next year,
Yeah.
right? So I encourage anyone to actually take a look at this team.
I I figure Aaron Hurd and he might compete for time depending on where Aaron Hurd has played, but he's someone obviously might go to Bayer Leverkusen at some point if all goes well, perhaps. But I didn't know if you
Mhm.
thought those two would be fighting for space.
So I think anyone who's on that MLS Next team by design has a chance
Hmm.
to play for the MLS team next year. Not all of them are going to make it, of course, right? But the whole idea is that this team is sort of the blueprint of what the MLS team next year is going to be,
Sorry, yes, I see where you're going now.
right? So, which is interesting because I think you're going to get a really good idea of what you can expect, right?
Hmm.
Sort of what Charlotte has done with the Charlotte Independence in USL. Only this is going to happen in MLS Next Pro. So, yeah, that gives you a good reason to go to the games. I think if you're a St. Louis
Yes.
fan and check it out, right? Because I think you can watch that, and it's going to be for them. It's a great thing to have, because no other MLS team had that previously. That they sort of have this laboratory
Hmm.
for a full year where they can just test out these ideas and see how it goes, and also like play these really young players, like you said, Aaron Hurd, for example. Or you've got a few other ones like Anthony Falball, who's only 16, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, keep a close eye on that.
And then we might get an idea of where we might see someone like Ostrak or
Well, so
Joao Klaus,
yeah,
perhaps.
yeah. So Ostrak and Klaus, like my understanding is that they're going to play for this team.
Yeah, which is insane, right?
Which is, yeah, it's kind of weird, but I mean, Christian Fuchs did the same for Charlotte.
Yeah.
He played for the Independents, right? So it's not unheard of that these teams, like I guess we just saw it at USL in the past, that expansion teams would like have a USL team and then sign players and have them already play in the USL team for like half a year or so, and then
Hmm.
make that transition. So, but yeah, the plan is to have Joa Klaus and Ostrak and maybe a couple other guys play for this
Yeah.
team.
It's insane. So I'm curious because here we're thinking the difference between, boy, it'll be really good to get our team firing on all cylinders together. But at the
Hmm.
same time, are they going to lose a little bit of punch having to play such a low level for half a season or less even? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's still better than just having training matches. And again, I
Mhm.
mean, that's what it is, and it's not that long. It's really only from July to, like, when does the season end? November, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So I don't think it's the end of the world, to be quite honest. And again, I mean, it gives everyone a good idea on preparation to see where they're at and what style of play they can play. And I know that, like, the current management staff, Bradley Cannell, is going to, although officially he's not the manager of this team, but he's still going to have a pretty strong hands-on approach on how this team is going to be set up. So I think it makes total sense. And yeah, I'm actually really curious about this league altogether.
Me too.
To be honest, because we included on Transfermarkt in the database, and we had to add all these guys that did previously not even exist in our database. But we're going to have all the players, and we're going to have the schedule. We're going to have all the data on it. So it's a huge new project that me and my team have to take care of.
I had a feeling you might have a hand in it. We were actually going to, you guys were some of the first to put the team names online, and we weren't sure they were right, but they ended up being correct. So we weren't sure.
We had working names for some of them, because we didn't know either. So we just said, like, okay, we know which teams are going to be in it. And we knew that, like, some of them were already second teams.
I think ours was correct, though. Yeah, I think it was City 2 or something like that.
Yeah. And I think all of them, actually, most of them ended up being correct, which is, I thought they would be maybe a bit more creative in MLS to give these teams. See, I hate the fact that they all just choose.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Except for, of course, Rochester, it's an independent club. Real Monarchs, I like that. I like that Seattle's team, that Tacoma Defiance, is like, just give them a different name, like, or North Texas, like, give them their own brand. I think that'd be kind of cool. Kind of like, what the NHL does with the AHL. Yeah. We all know these are the farm teams and have the same logo and everything. And but for the most part, they have their own names. I know the Vancouver Canucks, my NHL team, of course, it's the Abbotsford Canucks in the AHL. But just be a bit more creative.
I'm with you. Those and all the teams you mentioned that you liked the names, those are left over from, like, the attempt to be different in the USL. So I thought that was a nice aim. Maybe we'll see a resurgence of that someday.
I think that would be really cool. Do, like, just just like maybe call them the St. Louis City Boys, or like you don't even need to do much. You could still use the same branding, right? Yeah, like same colors and everything, but it gives you an opportunity to put a different logo on it.
Yeah,
and sell more stuff.
I agree.
This is where I'm at. Like, why are you passing up the opportunity to sell more stuff?
Yeah, they'll get there. I think it's just a little early. No one's really thought too hard about anything quite yet. I think they're all just trying to make sure we have a decent season here. It's been so fast. But one person that's going to play for that team, and the 2 team, another person, is Joao. I always get that wrong. Joao Klaus, striker. Big guy. Hoffenheim doesn't seem to value him, seem to be sending him out on loan, which we've seen as being good and bad here in St. Louis so far. What do you think?
Yeah, I actually, he did really well on his loan stint in Austria. And after that loan stint in Austria, they actually thought that he would stay with Hoffenheim. For whatever reason, that did not materialize. His numbers at Lask were really good. I think it was 12 goals in the end, right? Let me just pull that up before I say something that's not correct.
I have 24 goals, 5 assists in 61 games. I have Transfermarkt up.
That's correct. Yeah. So, but he had a season where he was quite good. I think it was his second year. Okay. 2019-2020, where he had 12 goals and 4 assists in 28 Austrian Bundesliga games. And then previously at Helsinki, his numbers were excellent. He scored 21 goals and 4 assists in the Veikkausliga. I think Lutz knows as part of Hoffenheim when they initially signed him, right? And he has a very Brazilian scouting, or had a very strong connection to the Brazilian scouting team back there. So I think my reading of the situation is that he knew this player and he knows what he can deliver, and sort of sees a potential there that he just feels this setup could work for him. And I have to add too, like last year with Standard Liège, and Standard Liège was like in a really weird kind of situation where the fans were really unhappy with the players and the club and all that. And at one point, I think they even stormed the training facility. So it wasn't a good place to be at. and he scored 5 goals and 4 assists in 13 games.
Mm.
Those are good numbers, right?
Yeah.
Right. He didn't really quite replicate it this year, and then he hasn't really replicated it for where he is right now in St. Trudens. But I personally think this is a really good player, and the way I understand this deal too, they signed him for 3.2 million euros. The actual figure that I first quoted was $5 million, and that's because the number that I was given included his salary over the entire period,
Oh, okay.
MLS period, not the MLS Next Pro. And this
Mhm.
is also why he's a DP player, designated player, right? Because Major League Soccer, in its infinite wisdom, does not just count salary as part of the designated player deal, but also the fee paid.
Yeah.
And then they split it up over 3 years. And if the fee and the salary over the period of the contract is over DP, you can't buy it down, which I sort of knew. I know a couple of people at the MLS office that explained this to me. I think it's a ridiculous rule. Maybe the transfer fee should be separate from the salary, but here we are, and this is why he's a designated player. Because when you just take his salary is significantly below what the designated player would be. So this is actually a pretty good signing in that regard, right? Because I think, and someone in the MLS headquarters will probably correct me on this, but if I'm not mistaken, you can actually buy that down later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking about whether we could, and we think that it's low enough that you can buy it down with
Just
GAM.
not
But
the first year, I think.
yeah, but all the things you're talking about, I imagine everyone has seen the Sam Stejskal article that was, talking to the financial executives for all the MLS teams. And so
Yeah.
I thought that was a great article. And so I wasn't aware about that until yesterday, really, when I read that article. But
yeah, I had someone break this deal down for me, and this is how it was explained.
Okay. Well, lucky you have someone.
I needed someone to help me with this too, because sometimes these rules are just over the top, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, he is a designated player because of the transfer fee only.
Yeah. And another cool thing that I read just in passing is that it sounds like these executives aren't keen on all the rules anymore either, that there might, there's a change in attitude. And so it's just waiting on the league to
I
make
think
their
they're working
changes.
really hard of taking fees out.
That'd be great.
Like, just have the salary as like the part of whether a player is, which in my opinion makes way more sense, because like all of a sudden someone like him, and the fee wasn't that high. It essentially they paid market value for him, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he then all of a sudden is in the same category as someone like Thiago Almada, who Atlanta paid $16 million for.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, but that's not the same category.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, while we're on that topic, Matt Baker gave me a lot of these questions, my colleague here at Flyover Footy. But let's talk about that. So $3 million is right around 3 million euros at market. I've got him right here in front of me. And what do you think about St. Louis's build as far as what he will be like in comparison to the other DPs? Do you think he'll be on the high side of the spending, low side of the spending, or it's just too soon to say?
I think he's probably going to fit right into that category. He's
kind of average.
Yeah, so like I know, for example, with Joachim Nielsen, where a deal is agreed in principle, which does of course not mean it's done, right? The understanding is that St. Louis is his preferred destination, but nothing is ever done until you see the piece of paper signed and the club announcement with the nice little logo and everything, right? And even then, I've seen transfers still fall through afterwards. But
me too.
But they are very close, and even with that, my understanding is that it's not a designated player deal.
Cool.
Because in this case he's a free transfer, right? So there's no fee involved. So whatever you're signing him for, and it's actually, it's just the salary, and he makes, I think he makes about 800,000 euros Bielefeld, but that salary gets cut by 45% if they get relegated. So, it's not like his contract expectations were, oh, I'm going to come over here and make $2 million.
Yeah.
right? And then also, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but Missouri is a low tax state.
Yeah, I think on the state level it's relatively low. Yes.
Yeah. So like you have to, because in Germany you make 825,000 and takes 50%,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you come to St. Louis and let's say you make
Good point.
650 and the taxman only takes 20.
Might
So
not
like
even be that. Yeah.
that is actually like something that I find really interesting about a lot of these like recent transfers that you see from these like players who are still in the prime coming over, because they're like, okay, MLS is actually pretty good, and I'm making 5 million in Germany or Italy or wherever, and then they come here and they like make $4.5 million, but what they get at the end of the day is still more.
Well, if you run into Joachim, he will have to be careful. There's a personal property tax, so he has to be careful how expensive
I'm
his
sure
car
he has
is.
people way smarter than both of us trying to
Yeah,
figure that out for him.
absolutely true. Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about Joachim. I was interested in the fact that he was excited to come over and he wants to make sure he stays in the Swedish national team. And I was a
Mhm.
little surprised at that. And that was been mentioned about some other players we've talked about today, that
Yeah.
in general, we can just talk about how MLS has really come up in the world. I've been following the USL for a long time, and now I'm paying so much closer attention to MLS and hearing, like you've said, young players wanting to come to MLS and not feeling trapped here. Other players feeling like they might get into a team like Sweden, their
Or
international
stay
team.
or stay in a team like Sweden, like in his case, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that MLS might help that. That's really shocking to me. So maybe you can kind of talk about that. I mean, you're German, and so I'm curious what you have heard from people internationally about
Mm.
MLS lately in that way.
I know there's a ton of attention from scouts and agents on the league, for two reasons. A, because it's a great market to discover young talent. And B, it's also one of the few markets, because I categorize it as one of the top 10 leagues in the world now, right? I
Yeah.
think it is still behind those top 5 in Europe, by significantly, but it is probably, when it comes to salary and average market value and that sort of stuff, it is right around the same as Portugal and the
Hmm.
Netherlands. What it lacks, of course, is those big teams. Like there is no Ajax, there is no Sporting, there is no Benfica, there's no PSV. Those big teams don't exist. But
Hmm.
then there's also not these really small teams that those big teams like destroy 8-0, right? Those don't exist in this league either. So when you
Yeah.
go top to bottom, it's about there. But what is different is right now, because MLS has all these billionaire owners, and we had attendance because America didn't care about the pandemic. So because of that, there's actually money here, and so a
Hmm.
lot of European agents are saying, we can actually still sell the guy that no one in Europe is currently wanting to have, right? Or you have some European
Interesting.
club that's saying, oh, we got this left back and he's making this amount of money and no one in Europe wants him, but an MLS team might,
Hmm.
right? So I think that's really quite interesting, but that increases the buying power of the league, and the buying power of the league also makes it a more desired destination. And that in turn means that more scouts and agents are looking at the league, which in turn also means that all of a sudden the standing of the league has increased internationally, right?
Yeah.
So if you have the eyeballs of scouts and agent on your league already, then if you're an international playing for a team like Sweden, that's not necessarily a step down for you.
Hmm. That's cool to hear. And it is nice to hear. I think mostly as Americans, we hear the league, playing level is really rising. And I do think it's true to a certain extent. But having that financial explanation, I think, is a lot easier to believe. And it's more concrete as well to be able to believe that. That's interesting to hear.
Yeah, and it's the feedback I'm getting too, right? Like
Yeah.
this is not me just saying this. This is feedback from people that I talk to every day about the league and the competition. And I find that interesting too, because
Mm.
obviously we have teams in this league that when you watch them, you're like, oh my God, why am I here? And then you have other teams where like they're really good, but the buying power is there. The money is there to spend. And it's not that hugely different than watching a mid-table game in out and outside of the top 5 leagues,
Hmm.
right? I think what we're still lacking is absolute elite teams.
Yeah.
And that is the salary cap world, isn't it?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, you just can't have that in a league where everyone is the same or almost the same. I guess some clubs choose not to be the same.
Yeah.
There's some teams that still refuse to spend money, but I mean, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
But I think the level is rising every year, and I'm really curious to see how St. Louis. And I think St. Louis is going to be a team that's going to be built a bit different. Joachim Nielsen already shows this. All of a sudden, there's a team that's actually caring to spend a little bit more money on defense, and the salary cap world means that a ton of money is spent on attack, maybe a bit of money on midfield, and then the goalkeeper and the rest is all kind of like, well, maybe you find some guy in college who can stand on that position.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, I do think Americans tend to be better on the world stage and the positions further back on the field. But I think that's a conversation for another day, and maybe we can fit it in with parity versus killer super teams and things like that. There's a lot to talk about there, but probably not today. But I'm glad you brought it up. It's all stuff we should be thinking about with this MLS build. And I want to move on to talking about Lutz Pfannenstiel. Clearly, you know so much about the Bundesliga that I've been really excited to hear what Germans and the international community, especially the soccer international community, thinks about Lutz Pfannenstiel. And you've been following him longer than us, so I thought I'd open up and let you kind of talk about what you know about him and perhaps how people view him.
Yeah, I mean, he had an interesting career, right?
Yeah,
I think he's the first
maybe the most interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I first saw him play here with the Vancouver Whitecaps. I think that was still in the was that when they played NESL or USL? It's a long time ago.
It was USL, I think Whitecaps too, right?
Yeah,
am I right?
And then he was no, this was when they still were like not in the
Okay.
MLS. This was before MLS. This is how long ago this is.
Yeah.
I'm aging myself here. This was when I was in university for my bachelor. But yeah, I think, so he's kind of gone from this being this globetrotter goalkeeper who's played in every corner of the planet. And he's kind of sort of used all these connections that he's made to build himself a really good career as a sporting administrator and then director, right? He was in scouting as well with Hoffenheim. He worked in the youth academies there. And I think his global network that he has really helped him with identifying players and finding players, maybe in places where other people don't look. And that sort of led to him, really being on the ascendancy inside the Hoffenheim setup. Hoffenheim setup is, of course, a very good setup in terms of what they do in terms of scouting, developing players, finding players. And then he went to Fortuna Düsseldorf, where I reconnected with him because I did an interview with him a few years ago for Forbes.
Cool.
He's just a really interesting person. And I think he's someone who spends a lot of time thinking about the decisions that he makes. He's not someone who just goes out and spends a ton of money on the players that he identifies. I think there's a certain profile that he also looks for. He wants someone who's athletic, fast, good on the ball, strong technical ability. And that's sort of, I think, what we're seeing here. And he's also, Bradley Cannell is a really interesting choice, in my opinion, as his head coach, because he knows Bradley for a long time. The two have worked together in their charity, but they also work together in their various different projects. So I can sort of see there's a natural connection there, and there's going to be a very strong interconnection between the boardroom and what's happening on the field, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating to watch what he's doing there.
It is. And to go back to like some of these guys that we've talked about today don't have incredible statistical attacking output, you know what I mean? And so it's been really interesting. I think Matt Doyle kind of went off on João Klaus yesterday, saying he didn't look that good and his stats aren't that good. And in some leagues he seems to do very well.
Maybe he needs to watch him every once in a while. I mean, I always love when like analysts that don't watch these smaller leagues say something like this.
Yeah.
People who work in the actual front offices of clubs are way smarter than we are. This is the thing that you have to remember too. they have access to statistics that we don't.
Yeah.
And yeah, I didn't see what Matt Doyle said exactly. So
It
I'm just
wasn't
gonna leave that
damning,
out.
and I do think he softened it at the end of the thread, but you know, I guess it's interesting that between the statistical production and seeing that there is this commonality between all these players, and that if they are being built for a system, I think we're going to kind of see in St. Louis what Lutz is made of. You know, can he build a system with a bunch of players that people might even doubt the production of? You know,
I think people said the same thing about Nashville, right?
Yes, they did. That is a great parallel.
How did that go?
Pretty good, I'd say. I mean, I'd be very happy if we had a similar season to them in the first few years.
Again, there's people working for these clubs that are way smarter than you and I or anyone else who's working at the journalism side of things. And knowing a bit about the Klaus deal too, I know he's not signed as a designated player anyways, and knowing about who else is coming, I don't know.
Well, I'm going to ask you about that at the end. We'll see what you can say, but more on Lutz. It's been interesting that you talked to him during the Fortuna Dusseldorf situation. It only lasted a year. I heard it was a difficult situation for him to have found himself in. Can you maybe elaborate on that just a little bit?
Well, it only lasted a year because he got the offer from St. Louis.
Oh, really? So I thought, I mean, it wasn't a great season either. That's debatable, but still, I had no clue. He literally just wanted this job.
Well, I think that this gave him an opportunity to work at a club that wasn't necessarily steeped in this fandom tradition. You know, German clubs have huge membership clubs, and every member thinks they own a piece. And I think that was something that really frustrated him. And this gave him an opportunity to work somewhere where he could build something anew. At least this is the impression I get from the times I've spoken to him, and to build something from scratch, right? And not having to deal with those annoying members that tell him every part of the way that this is wrong. And also like in Düsseldorf, Köln, Leverkusen, Gladbach area, there's several newspapers that print 3 or 4 pages each on every club in that region every day. So they show up to training sessions, right? And some guy will have yelled at the coach that makes the headlines, right? And then you had situations like, one of my favorite stories is that Friedhelm Funkel, the former Fortuna Düsseldorf head coach, we didn't have a best relationship with either, but I know that Friedhelm Funkel, for example, went and play cards every Wednesday or Thursday evening. He went play cards with all the journalists.
Wow.
So it's like, how can you win that, right? Like if the guy that's like everyone's darling is buying everyone beers and is playing like skat with them, it's like,
that's funny.
You know, and if you are someone who just wants to, and he wanted to deconstruct and reconstruct Fortuna Düsseldorf from the ground up, and like you can't do that. And so I think he just looked for a place where he can do it. And I don't think the Bradley Cannell will be playing cards with any of the newspapers in St. Louis, because I assume there's only one. And and I don't think St. Louis City SC is going to feature heavily, not 4 or 5 pages heavily, right? So I think this is sort of where it's gone a little wrong. And like, you can just like work in quiet and do whatever you want there. And you know, there's a different sort of pressure, because like even in the first year, you're still kind of creating. So yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. I don't blame him, and he has communicated that to me as well. Even in a couple of times we've talked that you know, having a traditional club with lots of tradition can be a very difficult endeavor, and that makes a lot of sense. There's nearly no tradition here in St. Louis, and even what tradition there was, our fans have been very open-minded since he's come to change. So you know, I think he's landed in a good spot if that's what he was looking for. Anything else about Lutz? Oh, one thing I wanted to ask, and you kind of elaborated on it when you were mentioning the financial side of MLS versus the rest of the world, that we were wondering if Lutz is able to have pull, whether it's his experience, what people know about him in the international community, whether people are able to trust him, or if he's just a good talker, or perhaps it's that financial side that's been able to pull decent players to St. Louis at such an early stage in the game.
Well, Ostrak wouldn't be here, or Klaus wouldn't be there if he wasn't there.
Yeah.
Same with Joachim Nielsen, and same with the next few guys that will show up.
Yeah. Okay.
They won't come.
It's not just the money.
No, I think it's a bit more than that. I mean, obviously, MLS is also a place, like North America is a place that a lot of players want to go to now.
Yeah.
And then not just for the financial reasons, also because of the lifestyle. And I think that is something where a lot of these cities are very competitive, sort of for the experience that players can have, experiencing. And it's not just to retire anymore, it's to be competitive. And I think that's a huge difference.
Yes.
And yeah, I think knowing a bit of what's in the works, I can't reveal it because it's not anywhere near enough close. I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about.
So a lot more fun and interesting players on the way, perhaps, you might say.
Maybe.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to that. I've been really excited about the way it's been going so far. I think the last thing I was curious about is I find it interesting if you were to look at what Charlotte's been doing in this kind of a bit of a debacle with the late DP signing not working out, and the coach kind of saying that he's worried about the season as far as that's concerned. What do you think about how St. Louis is doing so far with their build? Do you think it's really early is a good thing or a bad thing, or whether they've got a lot up their sleeves that'll happen last minute? I don't know what you think about how it's been so far.
I think it's still really early.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of surprised how many players since March 4th they've already signed.
Me too. Yeah.
And
it
how
feels
many
early to have this many.
And knowing some of the targets that have been identified, how many other targets there are that are also close already. So yeah, but I think it's the difference is that they have this MLS Next Pro thing.
Yeah.
Right, where they can say, okay, if we have 4 or 5, maybe 6 guys signed by July, maybe more, then they can already play together. Which of course then also means you have a little bit more chemistry when you hit MLS. As for Charlotte, I mean, that's that deal with I think it was Diaz, right? That was all that was done, and it fell through. I mean, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
And then you're so late in the game, and you have an open DP spot, and then some legal thing back in Spain torpedoes it, even though the contract is already signed. And that happens. That's sport. But in the end of the day, thankfully, have the time to make up for it. And I didn't actually think they played badly in their first game either.
No, I think everyone was pleasantly surprised. I think who did they play? DC. I think some people were saying, what does it say about DC? But we'll see in that way, right?
Yeah. So, yeah. Anyways, we're off topic, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we're wrapping up because I think that's the majority of what I wanted to ask you. Is there anything that maybe we should know, or any thoughts we need to be thinking about as St. Louis fans going forward, things we should be looking for?
Watch the MLS Next Pro team.
Yeah. There's a game tomorrow, so I'll say that. We're playing our old rival, St. Louis FC, and Louisville City used to have a massive rivalry. It was called the King's Cup, since our names both derive from a King Louis, even though they're separate King Louis. So this is a big deal. We're all excited to kind of feel this rivalry a little bit, even though it's preseason. So go to the game tomorrow at 3:30. But I cut you off there, Manuel. What were you going to say?
Yeah, that. Just go and watch it. Buy the tickets. I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think it's $10. Come on, guys. We can do it.
Like $10 for football. And I assume they have beer and snacks and all that kind of stuff too.
And it's going to be 73 degrees tomorrow. It's going to be gorgeous.
What that is.
I don't either. I want to say it's probably like 21 or something. What's extremely comfortable? It's like a temperature you set your house at.
22?
Yeah.
Like 21, 22? Okay.
Something like that.
It sounds nice.
It's going to be beautiful, which is a rarity here in Missouri, in my opinion. It doesn't last long, so it'll be a good game tomorrow.
Yeah, go out and then support it. I think that's good fun. I'm gonna have to watch the Whitecaps tomorrow. I think I would rather be in 21 degrees Celsius, watching what could potentially be next year's team.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I'm super excited to see it. And Manuel, you've really given us a lot to think about and things to look for, as far as perhaps where and how these new players of ours are going to play based on what we might see tomorrow. Thanks for talking to me and putting up with my time zone and geography problems I've had today. I really appreciate it.
What you should do after this show, you should take a map of Canada.
I need to.
Just take a look.
I really need to, and I will do that.
Massive country to the north of the US.
I've heard of it. Yes, this Canada you speak of. Well, Manuel, thank you again, and I hope maybe we'll talk to you soon when you drop some more rumors and announcements on our laps in the near future. I hope.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely, and thank you so much for having me, Phil.
It was a pleasure.